I can still feel the weight of that night pressing on my chest as if it happened yesterday. The air inside our home in Seattle was heavy with tension, thick enough to taste. The dining room, once a place for laughter and family dinners, had turned into a silent stage for an ambush I never saw coming. The mahogany table gleamed under the chandelier light, and my reflection stared back at me, calm on the outside, but every muscle in my body tightened as I sensed something was wrong. David, my husband of 8 years, sat at the head of the table, his posture stiff, his eyes unreadable. His parents, Thomas and Eleanor, flanked him like guards awaiting orders. His sister, Amanda, stood near the fireplace, tapping her polished nails against the envelope she held. Her smirk gave everything away before she even spoke. "Look at these," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy as she slid a thick stack of glossy photographs toward me. My heart thudded once hard. I reached out slowly, feeling every eye in the room burning into me. The photos showed me sitting across from men in restaurants and coffee shops around the city. Different days, different clothes, different men. Some pictures caught me smiling. Others captured a hand gesture or the tilt of my head. To a stranger, they might look intimate. But to me, they were simply meetings, serious, professional, deliberate. Amanda's grin widened as she turned to David. "While you've been working yourself to exhaustion at Gray Tech, your wife's been entertaining men all over Seattle. I told you she wasn't faithful." My mother-in-law gasped like she'd been rehearsing it for weeks. "Oh, dear Lord," she whispered, pressing a hand to her chest. Thomas said nothing, but his disapproving glare said enough. David's jaw tightened, and he stared down at the photos as if they might explain away the confusion building in his mind. For a long moment, I said nothing. My silence made them uncomfortable, and that gave me power. I leaned back slightly, studying the photos. "You must have spent quite a bit of money on these," I said quietly. "Good lighting. Clear angles. Even timestamps. You must have hired someone skilled." Amanda blinked, momentarily thrown off by my calmness. "You're not denying it?" she asked, her voice sharp now. I met her eyes and smiled faintly. "Denying what? That I met people in public places? That I had coffee with someone at noon in broad daylight? Tell me, Amanda, does that sound like a scandal or desperation?" Her smirk faltered. David looked up at me, confusion warring with suspicion. I turned my gaze to him and spoke slowly, each word measured. "Before we discuss these photos, maybe we should talk about Jessica." The color drained from David's face. Eleanor's hand froze halfway to her glass. "What?" she whispered. "Yes, Jessica," I continued, my voice steady. "The woman David's been seeing since March. The one Amanda introduced him to at her company's charity event. The one he's been paying for a downtown apartment in her name." The room fell into dead silence. Even the soft ticking of the wall clock felt deafening. Thomas cleared his throat, pretending not to understand. Amanda's lips trembled as she looked at David, who refused to meet her eyes. I gathered the photos into a neat stack and slid them back across the table. "You should have done better research," I said, standing up. "Next time you plan to destroy someone, make sure they don't already know the game." No one spoke as I turned and walked out of the dining room. My heels echoed through the hallway like quiet gunshots. Upstairs, in the privacy of my office, I finally allowed my mask to slip. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from fury. I opened my laptop and connected the external hard drive I'd hidden months ago behind the bookshelf. I'd been suspicious since the day David's late-night work meetings became more frequent, and Amanda started calling me with sudden bursts of concern about my marriage. I wasn't naive. I had built my life and my business from nothing. I knew the scent of deceit when it filled a room. On that drive, I had copies of everything: emails between David and his mistress, fake accounting entries from Gray Tech, and documents showing how company funds were being redirected to Amanda's account. What they didn't know was that Gray Tech had been my idea, my investment, my creation. When I met David, I already had $480,000 saved from years of consulting work. I trusted him to help me grow it, not to steal it. As I sat there, the faint sounds of voices rose from downstairs. I could make out Eleanor's anxious whisper and Amanda's sharp tone, but I ignored them. Instead, I created encrypted folders labeled evidence, transfers, and conversations. Each file name felt like a shield, something that would protect me when the storm hit. I opened one final folder containing audio recordings. One of them captured David's drunken voice a few weeks earlier, bragging to his father about how it'll all be mine soon anyway. My blood ran cold when I first heard it, but now it gives me strength. When I finished backing up everything, I leaned back in my chair and stared at the city skyline through the window. The lights of Seattle flickered like distant stars over Lake Union. My reflection in the glass looked calmer than I felt. I realized then that this wasn't just about betrayal, it was about reclaiming control. They wanted to corner me, humiliate me, make me the villain in a story they wrote. But what they didn't understand was that I had already turned the page. Downstairs, I heard the faint creak of the front door closing and the muffled sound of David's car pulling away. The silence that followed was almost peaceful. I locked my office door, unplugged the drive, and tucked it into the safe behind the bookshelf. Standing there, I took a deep breath and whispered to myself, "You have everything you need now. Let them think they've won." That night, I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't chase anyone for explanations. I poured myself a glass of red wine, opened my notebook, and started writing down a new plan. One that would make every lie, every forged document, and every fake photograph collapse under its own weight. They thought they had trapped me, but what they didn't know was that I had already built the escape. And soon, I'd use it to burn down every false story they'd tried to write about me. The morning after that disastrous dinner, the sky over Seattle was gray and swollen with clouds, like it carried the same weight that sat in my chest. I barely slept, and yet, as I stood before the mirror tying my hair into a neat bun, I felt steadier than I had in weeks. The betrayal had burned away my fear, leaving behind a calm resolve. By 9 o'clock, I walked into the glass-fronted office of Mark Reynolds, my attorney, in downtown Seattle. His firm overlooked the waterfront, and the rhythmic tapping of rain against the windows filled the quiet room. Mark had been my legal advisor for years, handling contracts and business filings when Gray Tech Consulting was still nothing more than an idea scribbled in a notebook. He looked up from his desk as I entered, his expression softening with concern. "You look like someone who's seen a ghost." "Worse," I said, setting the thick envelope on his desk. "A family with too much time and too little conscience." He arched an eyebrow, sliding the photos out of the envelope. As he flipped through them, a smirk tugged at his lips. "They really thought these would hold up in court? You're clearly in public places. And half these men are wearing business suits in the middle of the day." I folded my arms. "They're all divorce lawyers, Mark. Every single one. I met them to discuss my next steps after finding out about David's affair." Mark's laughter was low, but the humor didn't reach his eyes. "So they tried to paint you as unfaithful while your husband was moving assets behind your back. Classic projection." He leaned back in his chair. "How much do you know?" I slid a flash drive across the desk. "Enough to bury them." Inside that drive were months of data, emails showing transfers of company funds, falsified board minutes that removed my name from the co-founder list, and payments made to Amanda disguised as consulting fees. Gray Tech Consulting had been built with my $480,000 in startup capital and 10 years of my professional connections. Without me, there would have been no contracts, no clients, no business. Yet they had rewritten history to make me a silent partner. Mark tapped his pen thoughtfully. "You've got them cornered. Fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and conspiracy to defame. That's not just a civil case. That's criminal exposure if you wanted to push it." "I don't want revenge," I said, though my voice trembled slightly. "I just want my life back. My name. My work. Everything they tried to erase." He nodded. "Then let's start by making this official." For the next few hours, we sat side by side drafting affidavits, cross-checking financial statements, and lining up every piece of evidence in a timeline. By noon, Mark had already emailed his legal assistant to prepare filings for King County Superior Court. Watching him work was like watching a surgeon, precise, calm, unstoppable. When I finally left his office, The rain had turned into a downpour. I didn't bother with an umbrella. The cold water against my skin felt cleansing, like it was washing away the residue of their lies. That evening, David came home earlier than usual. His tie hung loose around his neck, and he looked like a man who hadn't slept either. I was sitting in the living room, laptop open, sipping coffee. He hesitated by the doorway. "Can we talk?" I looked up but said nothing. He took that as permission and sat across from me. "I didn't know they were going to do that," he said, voice low. "Amanda told me she just wanted to talk to you, not humiliate you like that." "Humiliate me?" I repeated, arching a brow. "You sat there, David. You watched. You didn't say a word." He ran a hand through his hair, his guilt as obvious as the storm outside. "I made mistakes, I know. I didn't want to lose everything. Dad said if we could shift some assets, it would protect the company from taxes, but I didn't realize." I pressed record on my phone quietly, letting it sit between us on the coffee table. "Didn't realize what? That you were moving money out of my reach? That you were rewriting company documents to erase me?" He looked up sharply, caught off guard. "It wasn't like that," he snapped, then lowered his tone. "I was trying to protect us." I smiled, the kind of smile that made him visibly uncomfortable. "Protect us? You mean protect yourself?" "Because I saw the transfers, David. $250,000 to Amanda's personal account labeled Operational Adjustment." "How creative." His face drained of color. For the first time, he realized the scale of what I knew. He started stammering excuses, but it didn't matter. Every word, every half-admission, was being recorded. By the time he retreated upstairs, the recording was saved, backed up, and encrypted in my system. I stared at the progress bar on my screen as it reached 100%, then closed the laptop with a quiet click. The next few days moved like clockwork. Mark filed the documents, and the summons went out. Subpoenas were issued for Greyteka's financial records, and within 72 hours, federal marshals walked through their office doors downtown. Amanda called me the moment it happened. Her voice was shrill with panic. "What did you do?" she shouted. "You'll regret this. You've ruined everything." I stood by the window, watching raindrops slide down the glass. "No, Amanda. You ruined everything when you tried to destroy me. All I did was show the truth." She hung up with a furious scream, and I let the silence return. That evening, I packed a small bag and checked into a boutique hotel near the waterfront. I didn't want to spend another night in that house filled with deceit. The suite was modern and quiet, with a view of the Space Needle glowing through the mist. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe. Lying in bed, I thought of the years I'd spent building Greytek, late nights drafting proposals, weekends chasing clients, the thrill of signing our first $400,000 contract. I had poured my energy into that company like it was a child, only for them to try to take it from me. But they had underestimated one thing. I never built anything without knowing how to protect it. The next morning, Mark called with an update. "They're panicking. The judge has frozen the accounts. Amanda's name is all over the transfers, and David's been subpoenaed to testify." I smiled, sipping my coffee as sunlight finally broke through the clouds. "Good," I said softly. "Let them feel a fraction of what they put me through." Seattle looked different that day, cleaner, brighter, almost forgiving. I wasn't just fighting for money or ownership anymore. I was fighting for my dignity, for every woman who had ever been betrayed and told to stay quiet. By the end of that week, the woman they had tried to destroy no longer existed. In her place stood someone sharper, calmer, unafraid to burn everything down and start again. They thought I'd be the victim, but I was already planning my victory. The day of the hearing arrived wrapped in cold gray clouds that hung over Seattle like a warning. The courthouse stood tall and stern against the drizzle, its stone facade slick from rain. I stood outside for a moment before entering, my reflection faint in the glass doors, steady posture, calm eyes, a woman who had already survived the worst. The truth was I wasn't nervous. I was ready. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Every sound, the squeak of shoes, the shuffle of papers, the low hum of voices, seemed amplified. David sat at the defendant's table beside Amanda, both dressed in muted tones as if hoping invisibility would soften their guilt. His parents, Thomas and Eleanor, sat 2 rows behind them, whispering furiously as if they could rewrite reality before the judge entered. Mark Reynolds stood beside me, his expression composed but his tone sharp as he arranged our folders on the table. "They're going to squirm," he murmured. "Just stay calm. You've already won the facts. Now we show the truth." When the judge entered, the room fell silent. Everyone rose. My pulse quickened only slightly as I took my seat again, folding my hands in my lap. The bailiff read out the case number, Reynolds versus Gray Tech Consulting, asset concealment and defamation, and for the first time, I saw David flinch. Mark began our side with quiet confidence. "Your Honor," he said, "this case is not about a simple disagreement between spouses. It's about a deliberate, orchestrated attempt to destroy my client's reputation and steal her rightful assets." He clicked the remote, and the first photo flashed onto the courtroom screen, one of the very same glossy pictures Amanda had thrown across my dining table weeks ago. "These," he continued, "were used by the defendants to fabricate allegations of infidelity. Each man pictured here was identified and verified as an attorney, divorce and corporate fraud specialists who my client consulted privately after uncovering evidence of financial misconduct by her husband and his family." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Amanda's face went pale. I could see her fingers gripping the edge of the table. Mark went on, his voice steady. "These photos were not proof of betrayal. They were evidence of foresight. Evidence that my client knew what was being done to her and took legal steps to protect herself." Then came the audio recording. David's own voice echoed through the courtroom speakers, tired, slurred, and arrogant. "It'll all be mine soon anyway. She doesn't even know half of what we moved." The words cut through the silence like a blade. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. Thomas stared at the table. Mark let the moment hang before continuing. "My client does not come before this court seeking sympathy. She comes seeking justice. Attached to this record are detailed transfers, over $2.3 million moved from Gray Tech Consulting's joint business accounts to Amanda Gray's personal account under the label Inheritance Distribution. The funds were then routed through secondary accounts to conceal their origin." Amanda stammered, voice trembling. "It was for tax purposes. The money was meant to—" Mark interrupted smoothly. "Then why was it deposited into your private investment portfolio 2 weeks later?" Amanda's jaw fell open, and her lawyer tried to object, but the judge raised a hand. "Overruled. Continue, Mr. Reynolds." The next exhibit showed an email chain between David and his father. In one message, David had written, "Once the transfer clears, she'll have no claim to the company. Amanda can file her consultancy paperwork afterward." It was over at that moment, and everyone in the room knew it. The lies unraveled faster than they could speak. David's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, but he sat frozen, his gaze fixed on the table as if the wood grain might swallow him whole. Finally, the judge turned to David. "Did you authorize these transfers?" He hesitated, his Adam's apple moving visibly as he swallowed. The silence stretched. Amanda looked at him pleadingly, but he knew. The truth had cornered him. "Yes," he said softly. "I did." The room went still. That one word sealed their fate. By the afternoon, the decision was clear. The judge's tone was firm but measured. "This court finds that the plaintiff, Mrs. Reynolds, has provided undeniable proof of asset concealment and defamation. All funds wrongfully transferred will be restored to her, and she is awarded 60% ownership of Gray Tech Consulting, as well as $1,200,000 in damages." I felt my breath catch. Not in triumph, but in release. It wasn't about the money. It was about the truth standing where lies had once tried to bury me. Amanda burst into tears, muttering something about family betrayal. Eleanor whispered prayers under her breath. Thomas sat like a stone. David didn't move at all. When the court adjourned, Mark gathered the folders and looked at me with a faint smile. "You did it," he said. "They can't touch you now." As we walked out into the marble hallway, I saw Eleanor approach, her heels clicking against the floor. Her face was tight with fury, her eyes wet with disbelief. "You ruined our family," she hissed. I met her gaze, without flinching. "No," I said quietly. "You ruined it when you thought I'd stay silent." She turned away sharply, muttering curses under her breath. I watched her disappear down the corridor, her expensive coat trailing behind her like a shadow of everything she'd lost. Outside, the rain had stopped. The gray sky had lightened, and the air smelled clean, washed free of the storm. I stepped out onto the courthouse steps, the cool wind brushing my hair. For the first time in months, the weight on my chest lifted. Reporters were waiting by the curb, their cameras flashing as they shouted questions. "Mrs. Reynolds, how do you feel about the verdict?" I paused and smiled faintly. "Relieved," I said simply, "because the truth always comes home." That evening, back in my hotel suite overlooking Lake Union, I poured myself a glass of wine and watched the city lights shimmer across the water. My phone buzzed with messages, some from old friends congratulating me, others from women I barely knew thanking me for standing up for myself. Mark called just before midnight. "You're trending on social media," he said with amusement. "People are calling you the woman who beat the system." I laughed softly. Let them. I didn't beat the system. I just refused to let it bury me. When I hung up, I looked out at the skyline again. The reflections on the water danced like fireflies, beautiful and fleeting. I thought about everything that had led me here, the lies, the betrayal, the humiliation, and how it all burned away to reveal something unshakable inside me. Justice wasn't loud. It didn't need revenge or spectacle. It simply stood, steady and undeniable, like truth itself. And as I sat there that night, glass in hand, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. They had tried to trap me in their story, but I had written my own ending. 3 months after the court's final ruling, I found myself standing on the balcony of my new penthouse overlooking Lake Union. The water shimmered in streaks of orange and gold as the Seattle sun dipped below the skyline. The city that had once been the backdrop of my humiliation now stood as the silent witness to my redemption. I took a deep breath, letting the cool breeze wash over me, the faint scent of rain mixing with the distant hum of traffic. For the first time in a long while, peace didn't feel like a stranger. After the settlement, I sold my stake in Gray Tech Consulting for $5.4 million. It wasn't just a business decision, it was closure. I didn't want my name tied to the ashes of their corruption. With that money, I built something entirely my own, Aurora Strategies, a consulting firm that specialized in helping women safeguard their finances, protect intellectual property, and understand their legal rights before entering marriage or partnership. The office sat on the 12th floor of a sleek downtown building, its glass walls overlooking Elliott Bay. On opening day, I stood at the front door, watching a small group of women arrive, lawyers, analysts, designers, accountants, all of them strong, all of them survivors in their own way. They didn't just come for jobs, they came for purpose. And I knew exactly how that felt. It was a slow start. Some nights I stayed at the office past midnight, drafting strategies, reviewing cases, or helping clients who arrived crying, terrified of losing everything. Every story reminded me of the woman I used to be, the one sitting quietly at a dining table while others plotted to destroy her. Each victory we helped achieve became another brick in the foundation of something unshakable. Then, one afternoon, an unexpected name appeared on the appointment list. Jessica Carter. The woman my husband had cheated with. When she walked into my office, I barely recognized her. Gone was the confident woman who used to wear sharp blazers and diamond earrings. She looked fragile, clutching a manila folder to her chest. "I didn't know where else to go," she said softly, eyes red from crying. "David told me I'd be part of his new firm, that he'd take care of everything. Then he disappeared. I found out he took out a loan in my name." For a moment, I just looked at her. The old me might have turned her away, satisfied that karma had come full circle. But something deeper stirred instead. Pity, perhaps, or understanding. She, too, had been played by the same man who had once promised me the world. I motioned for her to sit. "Show me the papers," I said. We spent the next 2 hours combing through her documents. She had been used, manipulated, and left with debt that wasn't hers. By the end, she was shaking. I handed her a glass of water and said quietly, "You're not the first person he's tried to ruin, but you can make sure you're the last." She stared at me through tears. "Why are you helping me after everything?" I smiled faintly. "Because helping you isn't for him. It's for me." Jessica became one of Aurora Strategy's first major clients, and within weeks, one of our best employees. Her insight into corporate manipulation and her determination to rebuild her life made her invaluable. Soon, she joined as a project manager, and together we grew the firm into a success story that spread far beyond Seattle. We began getting calls from women in New York, Chicago, and even London. Each story was different, but the pattern was the same: betrayal, greed, and survival. As Aurora thrived, the Gray family crumbled. Within a year, Gray Tech Consulting filed for bankruptcy. Without my strategic contracts and connections, the company unraveled. Amanda was charged with tax evasion after investigators found she had been funneling money through offshore accounts. Thomas sold their Bellevue mansion to cover mounting legal bills, and Eleanor quietly moved to Florida, away from the whispers that followed their name. And David, well, his downfall came with poetic precision. He tried to start a new firm with investors from California, but his reputation was already poisoned. The deal collapsed when the background checks revealed the fraud case. Last I heard, he was living in a rented apartment in Tacoma, still trying to convince anyone who'd listen that he'd been framed. Sometimes, I wondered if he ever thought about me, about the woman he once underestimated. But the truth was, I didn't care anymore. My life had grown far beyond him. One crisp Saturday morning, I walked into the office early. Sunlight poured through the windows, reflecting off the glass desk where a fresh folder sat waiting. Inside was a letter, a thank you note from one of our clients, a single mother who'd regained control of her small business after her ex-husband tried to forge her signature on loan documents. She wrote, "You gave me back my life. Not just the money, but the strength to believe in myself again." Reading those words, I felt something shift inside me. This was what real victory looked like. Not revenge. Not public humiliation. Just quiet, meaningful change. That evening, I hosted a small dinner for my team at the penthouse. The table was filled with laughter, music, and the scent of roasted rosemary chicken. Jessica raised her glass and smiled at me across the table.
"To second chances," she said.
"To stronger women," I replied. As everyone cheered, I looked out the wide glass doors toward the lake. The city glowed under the night sky, lights rippling across the water like scattered stars. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one sitting silently as photographs of lies were laid before her, and I couldn't help but smile. That version of me was gone. Now, every morning when I stood by that same window with my coffee, I felt the same quiet gratitude. I had been broken, but I hadn't stayed broken. I had been betrayed, but I had not become bitter. Instead, I had turned their deceit into the blueprint of my strength. People sometimes asked me whether revenge was worth it, whether I felt satisfied seeing their downfall. My answer was always the same. It was never about revenge. I'd tell them. It was about freedom, about standing tall when everyone expected me to fall. The night deepened outside, and soft music played in the background. I leaned back on the couch, the lights of the city reflected in the window behind me. Somewhere inside, I knew I had closed the final chapter of that painful story. They had tried to destroy me, but instead, they had taught me the most important lesson of my life. Real power isn't in fighting fire with fire. It's in walking through the flames and coming out untouched. And as I watched the lights of Seattle shimmer across the lake, I whispered to myself with quiet pride, "You didn't just survive. You rebuilt. And you rose."